It has people talking about transgender in bathrooms, which is not an issue. When I visited 50 states in 4 years, we needed to get kids to read. 1 in 3 high school girls considered suicide after the pandemic. That's the issues that people are talking about. That's not a red or blue issue, right?
Sure.
So
I was going to ask you on that. Do you have the feeling, especially, we get older, I'm 37 now, and I've been saying probably for the last 20 years, statements like this is the most important presidential election ever, and things have never been this bad. And, people always say this. And now being a little bit older, I try to look back and I was like, okay, well, what, there are some things where I recognize I'm saying this as an aging person, right? Like, the 6'7" thing seems really dumb to me, and I'm thinking like this is like the kids are just dumber than they've ever been. But then I think, well, when I was a kid, there were a million things that I thought were hilarious that my parents thought were stupid or they didn't understand. So I'm trying to like keep track of things. When I look at education, things like I think even when I was a kid, things like vouchers and things like homeschooling were pretty politicized. But man, COVID really drove a wedge into everything. Do you feel like it's more, like everything feels like it's a political battleground these days? And when it's a political battleground, that there's no room, you can't even begin to talk about fixing anything because it feels like you don't even have people agreeing on what is real or what isn't real or what people are talking about. Yeah,
I'm an educator, not a politician. That's how I think. And what I've seen is the politics creep in so much. And I argued, I was campaigning last year, and I said, every year there's a new boogeyman. In 2020, when I got in, right? 2021, it was the masks. 2022, it was CRT. 2023, it was transphobia. 2024, it was, banning books. So there was a new boogeyman every year, and I would put money on it. This is part of the strategy to make people afraid of public education, so the private voucher sounds better. Let's commercialize K-12 like we did higher ed. There's a profit to be made. So I think it's inherently built into the bigger picture to create disruption so that the alternative sounds better than public education. I really do believe that's part of the strategy. It has people talking about transgender in bathrooms, which is not an issue. When I visited 50 states in 4 years, we needed to get kids to read. We had mental health crisis in our country. 1 in 3 high school girls considered suicide after the pandemic. That's the issues that people are talking about. That's not a red or blue issue, right? So we push for mental health supports. We push. So yet they politicize the things that create division. And I think that's by design. And sadly, what we end up doing is spending our bandwidth on responding versus talking about, no, we have a youth mental health crisis. No, we have students that are not we have students that are not learning AI at the pace that they should, because in China, they're learning it much quicker. We have students that are going through what you said, 15th century style education, while we have careers that are going unfilled because our schools haven't evolved yet. You follow me? Mm-hmm. So I do think that's by design. I think that's part of the plan to really destabilize support for public education by making educators or making our schools look like they're doing bad things to our kids, and we got to protect our kids. We're spending more time talking about that than how many kids die in our schools, or yeah.
One of my big complaints about really politics in general is that sometimes you get these issues that pop up that I would say are dumb issues. Mm-hmm. And even if you win the debate on the issue, I don't think people realize you've already lost. That if there's kind of like an old, for like internet forums or Reddit or social media, there's this old adage sometimes of there are certain people you don't engage with. Yeah. You might see a post that says, today, my sports team, did really well. And you want to go in and you want to post about how good their quarterback is. And there's a guy in there that just posted about how I think that the defensive coordinator is actually racist. He's a horrible, terrible human being. And you're like, oh, okay. Well, you might write a big post and you might be right. And you've got, well, actually, this is not true and blah, blah, blah. And you might even feel good after responding. But what you don't consider is that you came in there to post something positive. You got sidetracked by this guy who's just being an asshole. And then you've spent all this energy and time responding to him. And the positivity you wanted to contribute is not even there. And that kind of feels like a microcosm sometimes of our entire
You just summarized 4 years as Secretary of Education.
Yeah.
Do I go forward and say, it's the great equalizer. This is what we're going to do. We're going to focus on this. We're going to, rural America, 9 million students need attention, man. They're being ignored. Or do I respond to the CRT, the things that are being thrown up? And I think that's a reality. My comms team would tell you in DC, Miguel, don't even respond to that. Don't waste your bandwidth on that. Yeah. Really, Miguel, don't respond to that. If you get this question, pivot to that, because you got to talk about the proactive stuff you're doing, but that's not sexy. Mm-hmm. What's sexy is the division or the story of what happened in one community. And I think in a lot of ways, it's just really smart marketing to create distractions. And I mean, I don't have to get into the distractions that are being created on a national level today to distract from some of the things that people are really dealing with the economy, with, there's more division. And so distractions is a strategy. And I think in education over the last 4 years, I told you, the boogeyman of the year, CRT, that's not happening in our classrooms. The homophobia that was made to feel so bad, and it's not that we shouldn't have those conversations, but it shouldn't take up 90% of how we're using our time. As Secretary of Education, I had to focus on the things that were important to 50 million students across our country.
One of the things that's very difficult to communicate to people when it comes to like scientific research or political discussions in general is this concept of like effect size or magnitude, where, somebody might want to spend 95% of the time talking about, God, like I roll my eyes when I see the president signing these executive orders and there's like 50 schoolgirls around him and he's like, I'm saving their education. I was like, oh my God, like give me a break. But then, people will look at that and it's like, oh, so you don't think it's worth talking about? And it's like, I mean, like maybe for a microsecond or whatever. But like, I know that if this particular thing was an issue, I'm trying not to get ultra political, but like if all this trans stuff in the bathroom was a huge issue, I know it would be a huge issue because every single time a bad event happens, you guys would be screaming about it from the rooftops and you're not. And the fact that there's like, I think there was one case in, I think it was Virginia, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I was just at the state doing an event. But it was like one thing that happened and nobody, it was like a student who identified as something else and some incident came up. But other than that, it's like, this is not, I don't know how we're spending 90% of the time talking about a thing when our reading scores are so low, when we're having so much trouble coordinating between states, like what education should look like. We're having conversations about what higher education should be, but we're barely talking about that. And instead we're talking about who the last swimmer was and what place they got. And it's like, Jesus.
And it's really important. And that's a good point because I think that's what we click on. It was a lot of clickbait. And when I was doing media in DC, I was very careful. Like, I'd get on these big networks and I knew I had 90 seconds. And they're going to want to get to that clickbait, right? And I'm thinking to myself, how do I pivot to say, no, we're increasing access and affordability to college so more kids could have access. And I'm trying, how do I squeeze that in? It was more about how do I pivot and get to what I want to say. Ask me whatever you want to ask me. But I'm going to get to the things that matter to 50 million students to make sure kids are having access to mental health supports, that they're eating in school. We had a lot of kids hungry in school. That they have access to higher education, that Pell dollars are increasing so that they could go to college and reach their dream, right? So, but that's not, you're not going to get me on one of those major networks for me to talk about how the Pell Grant went up $900 for every American that qualifies for it, because that closed gaps in access to higher education. That's never going to get a call. Yeah. Now, the incident in Virginia might get me, 90 seconds on a network. So how do I pivot that? It was like I was dancing. Yeah.
My brain has broken a lot over the past couple of years, but I think one of the worst
bringing up a lot of bad
now because you bring up the because there are some things, especially now as a parent, where it's like, how are you at some board and you're arguing against school lunches? Like that's like a demonic position. Not to we're free to have our opinions on things, but I remember watching do you know who Piers Morgan is? Are you familiar? I think it was him and a few other people on a panel, and they were talking about the ingeniousness of like RFK's plan to make school lunches more healthy or something.
Love it.
And they were talking about how, can you imagine how crazy it would be for Democrats to fight against something that would be so obviously good? And I'm just remembering all the pushback Michelle Obama got from all of these Republicans. You're not going to tell our kids what to eat if they want to eat pizza every day. And I was like, I'm glad you guys are on board with it finally, but like, Jesus.
Or they forget to mention that, one of the first things that they did was cut the funding to give meals to schools, to kids, that cut the programs, right? That left kids hungry, or summer programming that didn't get their funding for dollars. So it's really It's not the substance. It's the comms. There's a comms approach to this. To get people only have attention span for 10, 15 seconds. They're going to listen to the top lines. What's in the devil's in the details, right? But that's never really parsed out. But I hear you. Yeah, that's just kind of what it's like. And I'm going to be honest with you. I talk to people, colleagues from the Hill, Congress people from the Hill, off camera. I had these crazy 4 or 5 hour hearings where I was getting badgered. You've seen them. And
I saw the intro, the one representative of the Republican Fox, I think. Yeah.
So let me tell you, and Virginia Fox, Congresswoman Fox. So you know what? Quick story about her. I've never said this anywhere else.
Yeah.
So we met maybe a little bit before that, right? Mm-hmm. And it's really theater.
Oh no! It's the same. It really is.
It's theater.
Yeah.
We met before that. She was a former college president. She came from a poor community. We had more in common, than people would imagine. And I remember sitting in her office and we're chatting. She goes, I think you're going to be just fine. She made me a cup of coffee. We're having coffee in her office. And she's like, if it was just, it's too bad you're with Biden. It's too bad you have those people around you because I think you would be a good one. And then she commences to try to tear me apart in front of the cameras. And then, we've had conversations after that stuff. And she goes, I would never have support from my party if I ever agreed with you on anything. Mm-hmm. College and career pathways is a purple issue. We need kids to have access to these high skill, high paying careers. We were working really hard in the Biden administration to open that up. And I'm still focusing on that. Post secretary, one of my big focuses is making sure kids, I was a tech school graduate. So I know the value of, learning skills to go on to get career or college, right? So she agreed with that. But she would never co-sign something with me because how dare I work with the Biden administration? That's crazy.
Yeah.
We're hurting kids. And I think that's happening rampant. And I'm sure it goes both ways, but I can tell you, I did this on purpose, and maybe it was a little cynical of me.
Sure.
I hand wrote letters to her saying, hey, we agree on this. Could we work together on it? And the closest we came was when I think her husband someone tried to scam her husband on student loan debt stuff or, payment or something like that. He got a scam email. And she said, we got to go after the scammers. I'm like, you're right. Let's work together on it. And we were close, but her staff didn't let her co-sign something with me. But that's the toxicity that exists right now in people that are responsible for making decisions for our students. So anyway, those hearings were crazy. But
yeah, real quick, I'm kind of curious because I have a few friends that have been grilled in closed door and open door hearings. I've heard it both ways. I've heard some say that they hate closed door hearings because what happens is whatever you say closed door, that transcript or whatever deposition, whatever, that might never be public, and that some of the people, I won't say names like Jim Jordan, but like some of these people might take quotes selectively from these and then publicly you don't have the full context of anything. So like, I hate closed door hearings. Yeah. And then if other people say, well, for an open door hearing, I'm being farmed for TikTok. You're here to ask me the craziest question ever. You're looking for a yes or no. You're going to reclaim your time. I'm reclaiming my time. I'm reclaiming my time. I need you to answer this. Do you hate students? I'm reclaiming my time.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So you're saying you would let your daughter go into the locker room with...
Yeah.
Yeah, it was all, and shout out to my team. Team 46, man. They were amazing. And my team would make sure that, Miguel, don't fall in the traps. Don't fall... So we had a system...
It's hard. Those conversations are really hard.
You want the inside baseball? You want the inside?
Yeah,
okay, so
sure,
I had 5-hour hearings, and I had maybe 45, 50 people that were going to come grill me. Mm-hmm. And I would have a coding system, 1, 2, and 3. 1, friendly fire. It's not going to be, not friendly fire, friendly, 2, it could go either way. 3, just be ready. You're going to have 5 minutes of hell. So when I got to those 3s, those people that were going to come after me, and I knew what their topics were, I knew what was important to them, and I knew that they were Twitter farming, right? Mm-hmm. So watch what I say, make sure that my statement doesn't end, don't pause after something that they could take and clip. But I would, and then I would get, I'm like, oh, damn, they got me. They, I said this, but they didn't catch the second part of the sentence. Mm-hmm. That's what it was. So I would spend months preparing for these hearings where they were just trying to get a clip.
Yeah.
And, that's sad when, the Secretary of Education or any other department, that's what your preparation is for somebody who's Twitter farming and not trying to work collaboratively on an issue. But that it is what it is. Now, do you spend time going back and saying, no, this is what I said? Or do you take your bandwidth away from the issues that you really need to focus on, or just responding to that? And that's kind of where we are, man.